Hi everyone. This upcoming video is kind of sad. I'm going to read out loud a few excerpts from Pete Walker's book, Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. And so that's why I put a picture here of Hiro Nakamura, my dog who passed away last year around this time. He still brings me so much comfort in my heart, and I thought he might bring that comfort to you too if you're facing some of this stuff and healing and moving through it. Courage and comfort seem to go hand in hand for healing this stuff. Thank you for being with me on this journey, and I will start reading. Hello everyone, this is Debbie Happy Cohen here with Joy-Based Living, and I'm sitting here with the video facing a page that says, what if I was never hit? It doesn't feel very joyful, but if you have been through CPTSD, CPTSR, severe codependency, the only way I know through that into real freedom is to face what hurt. And if you can't face it, it's going to be really hard to transform it. So I wanted to actually read a few excerpts from this chapter, and they're very sad, so heads up. That's my inspiration for today. I hope that it brings you a greater sense of relief and freedom to know that you're not alone, and that there is help out there, and that other people have crossed to the other side of this trauma, of this stuff. It's horrible. So I'm just going to read excerpts from it. Here I want to read the bottom paragraph. Denial about the traumatic effects of childhood abandonment can seriously hamper your ability to recover. In childhood, ongoing emotional neglect typically creates overwhelming feelings of fear, shame, and emptiness. As an adult survivor, you may continuously flash back into this abandonment melange. He talks fully about that in chapter 12. It's really heavy. Recovering depends on realizing that fear, shame, and depression are the lingering effects of a loveless childhood. Without such understanding, your crucial unmet needs for comforting human connection can strand you in a great deal of unnecessary suffering. This is the next page, denial and minimization. I'm going to read this paragraph. In a perversely ironic way, my parents' physical abuse of me was a blessing, for it was so blatant that my attempts to suppress, rationalize, make light of, and laugh it off lost their power in adolescence, and I was able to see my father for the bully that he was. Seeing my idealized mother's abusiveness came much later. Next section, verbal and emotional abuse. The fact that verbal and emotional abuse can be traumatic is lost on many childhood trauma victims, though it's rarely lost on recovering victims of cult brainwashing who are also prone to developing CPTSD. Many survivors of verbal and emotional abuse never learn to validate its soul-damaging effects. They never accurately assign current time suffering to it. Attempts to acknowledge it are typically blindsided with thoughts that it was nothing compared to kids who were repeatedly beaten, who, quote, had it so much worse. As a child, I minimized my father's frequent face slapping by comparing it to my friend's father who used to punch him. Much later, however, I finally realized that for me and many of my clients, verbal and emotional abuse damaged us much more than our physical abuse. Ongoing assault with critical words systematically destroys our self-esteem and replaces it with a toxic inner critic that incessantly judges us as defective. Even worse, words that are emotionally poisoned with contempt infuse the child with fear and toxic shame. Fear and shame condition him to refrain from asking for attention, from expressing himself in ways that draw attention. Before long, he learns to refrain from seeking any kind of help or connection at all. And let me ask you something. What do you think that does to a person's ability to be really awesome in the world and just show up in the world full-heartedly? I'll let you answer that question. And this section is it says eventually any inclination toward authentic or vulnerable self-expression activates internal neural networks of self-loathing. Oh, joy! The child is forced to exist in a crippling state of self-attack, which eventually becomes the equivalent of full-fledged self-abandonment. The ability to support himself or take his own side in any way is decimated. Now, that's really effed up because, like, if you think about it, like in court, you're not, in many court systems, you're not allowed to go against your husband or wife or yourself. And there it is right there. That's what it looks like when somebody does not have the ability to take their own side. It's very, very sickening and horrifying, actually. There's no healthy sense of self there. This is the next page. Disidentification from the critic is the fight of a lifetime. To liberate your identity from the toxic critic, you will have to repetitively confront it for a long time. You will have greater success if you're prepared to forgive yourself for repeatedly collapsing back into the old habit of self-blame. Progress is always a gradual back and forth process. Ironically, a pernicious type of self-hate can constellate around the self-judgment that one is especially defective because she cannot simply banish the critic. This is the typical toxic all-or-nothing thinking of the critic. And now I'm going to read one long section here. Emotional neglect, the core wound in complex PTSD. Minimization about the damage caused by extensive emotional neglect is at the core of the CPTSD denial onion. Our journey of recovering takes a quantum leap when we really feel and understand how devastating it was to be emotionally abandoned. An absence of loving parental interest and engagement, especially in the first few years, creates an overwhelming emptiness. Life feels harrowingly frightening to the infant or toddler who's left for long periods without comfort and care. Children are helpless and powerless for a long time, and when they sense that no one has their back, they feel scared, miserable, and disheartened. Much of the constant anxiety that adult survivors live in is this still aching fear that comes from having been so frighteningly abandoned. Many survivors never discover and work through the wounds that correlate with this level. This happens because they overassign their suffering to overt abuse and never get to the core issue of their emotional abandonment. As stated above, this is especially likely to occur to survivors who dismissively compare their trauma to those who were abused, more noticeably and more dramatically. I find this painfully ironic because some people suffer significant active abuse without developing CPTSD. Typically, they are, quote, spared because there's one caretaker who does not emotionally neglect them. Traumatic emotional neglect occurs when a child does not have a single caretaker to whom she can turn in times of need or danger. CPTSD then sets in to the degree that there is no alternative adult, relative, older sibling, neighbor, or teacher to turn to for comfort and protection. This is especially true when the abandonment occurs 24/7, 365 days a year for the first few years. Growing up emotionally neglected is like nearly dying of thirst outside the fenced-off fountain of a parent's warmth and interest. Emotional neglect makes children feel worthless, unlovable, and excruciatingly empty. It leaves them with a hunger that gnaws deeply at the center of their being. They starve for human warmth and comfort. And I like this phrase, contact, comfort, needs. I think we have those throughout life, but especially when we're very young and also very old. And I think that's where I'm going to leave this off. I thought about reading more, but if you read that and you resonate with it, it means that you've done enough homework to even get there. It means that the hope for you getting to the other side is really high. Okay, my camera keeps landing on this, so I'm going to read it. Emotional neglect alone causes children to abandon themselves and to give up on the formation of a self. They do so to preserve an illusion of connection with the parent and to protect themselves from the danger of losing that tenuous connection. This typically requires a great deal of self-abdication. Example for the forfeiture of self-esteem. The forfeiture of self-esteem, self-confidence, self-care, self-interest, and self-protection. Those are the keys to developing your true identity, to letting your true identity unfold. I'm glad I read that. It ends on a strangely good note, because those are the things that you want to build. It's why you're here. It's why you're listening to this and watching this. So before I end up turning the page again and wanting to read more, I'm going to end it here. And here's a beautiful view of this day. The beauty in you is even bigger. Much love.